Well, hello again everybody. We're going to have a look today at the Zorki 4 rangefinder. Here it is in all its Soviet beauty. So let's have a look at the camera and what it is and how it performs. It comes in this this leather case, which is pretty much like most Soviet leather cases. It has quite a strange sort of smell to it. The leather itself is quite, what can I say? Well, it's not the softest leather. I suppose that any good socialist wouldn't particularly want terribly soft leather. Why would they want those capitalist fripperies? So let's undo the camera and have a look at what we can actually see inside. I'm going to take it out of the case. So, usual thing, it just comes undone by this screw here, which you just unscrew. So we just lift it out of the case. Now, for my money, this is probably the best looking Soviet rangefinder. And it really is actually quite a handsome beast. It's got very nice lines. Personally, I particularly like the way that it has a cutout here, and then we get a little rise over here, and we come down again to this cutout here. I think that makes the lines really cool. And I do like this. This is a Latin, obviously a Latin text one for export. I do like this font, this text they've used along here. I think it looks, very modern, very up to date, and it suits the proportions of the camera. This one is a later one. It dates from, let's have a look. If we turn it around, we'll see a number, serial number on the back. This serial number begins with the digit 74, so we know that this particular Zorki was made in 1974. There's the logo of the Krasnogorsk optical factory or mechanical factory, and the slightly magical words, because it refers to a world that's now gone, so the slightly magical words "made in USSR" on the back there. There's the back view, and we'll turn it round again and check out the front. This particular model, the Zorki 4K, these were all covered in the nylon body cloth here, which personally I rather like. Earlier versions of the Zorki 4, were covered in a sort of a very hard plastic. In fact, it might even be moulded metal of some sort, I'm not sure, and painted black. But I think that this nylon body covering really sets the camera off and really looks cool. It has a lot of chrome on it, which again is really nice, so that's a nice sort of touch that is very reminiscent of the mechanical cameras. And this is a very mechanical camera indeed. In fact, it's so mechanical that there aren't any electronics on it at all. So what can we say about the Zorki? Well, the first thing to say is it's really small. Here's the size of my hand for comparison. And in fact, if I put my hand directly behind the camera, you can see that it actually really is quite small, and it will fit onto the palm of my hand. That's perhaps not surprising because it's one of the Leica-derived cameras. This is very, very much a Leica-derived camera, a direct descendant of the early Barnack Leicas, which were copied by the Soviet photography industry to give the Fed one and the Zorki one. So this is a direct descendant of the Zorki one. Zorki meaning far-sighted. But this is actually a much better camera than the Zorki one in many ways. And in fact I'll tell you what those are. The first is that this camera has, if we just turn it around there, you'll see that this camera has a lever wind. So there's no need to turn the wind knob. This has a lever wind which is much quicker. I'll just demonstrate how quick it is. It's a single throw lever wind. So it's really very easy to operate. Push it round as far as it will go, bring it back. It's a nicely chrome plated lever. Yeah. So that makes the camera very much more easy to operate, certainly than the Zorki 4, which was its immediate predecessor. The Zorki 4 it can be a little tricky to wind on because the wind on knob is here, but in fact you can't get your thumb between the wind on knob and this part of the housing here, and so you end up doing it with the edges of your finger and thumb, and that, if you use it a lot, that, believe it or not, actually can become painful. The 4K with the lever wind of course makes things very simple in that department. The camera comes with this lovely lens, which I'll take off to show you. It just unscrews. It has an L39 mount, the same as the screw mount Leicas, and in fact the same as all the other Russian rangefinders. And there you can see, I think we can see, I don't know if you can see that, there are the cloth shutters inside, just like the old Leicas. If I wind it on, you'll see that cloth shutter, both those cloth shutter blinds moving across. And we'll fire it, and there it goes. So here's the lens. This is the Jupiter 8. It's an f2 lens, so it's quite fast. 50mm standard, so-called standard lens. The lens was made by the KMZ company, Krasnogorsk Mechanical Factory. And this lens is a copy of the pre-war Zeiss sonar. And it's a really lovely lens. It's great in low light. It goes from f2 to f16, or is it? No, it's actually f2 to f22. So there's a good range of apertures there. Close and open it. It's got lots of range, lots of aperture range there. Like all rangefinder lenses, it doesn't focus terribly close. That is its only drawback. This focuses to 3 feet, from 3 feet I should say, to infinity. But of course, if you're a rangefinder user, you'll know that that is something that is simply one of the limitations of the rangefinder camera. And like any machine, use it within its limits and you won't go far wrong. If you try to exceed those limits, or try to use it like, for example, a modern SLR, then of course it's not going to be quite the same, but shoot within the limits and it's a lovely piece of equipment. It's actually quite well made. I'll go through some of the features. The shutter speeds run from, I hope you can see, I don't know if you can see on top there, these shutter speeds run from 1/1000th of a second all the way down to 1 second, and B, so there's a bulb setting where you can keep the shutter open for as long as you want. I think it's set to 1/1000th now. So what you do with this camera is you must always wind on the film, as I've just done, wind on the film and cock the shutter before you change the shutter speed. So it's wound on. I'm now going to change the speed. To do that you have to pull up this head and turn it. You'll find some resistance. I'm now turning it in an anti-clockwise direction. You'll find some resistance as you get into the slow speeds. That's because you're actually, as you're turning it, you're actually winding up a clockwork mechanism that times the slow speeds. So we're now on 1 second, and you'll hear the clockwork mechanism as I fire the shutter. And that's really nice. That's sort of an old school mechanical charm there. It's got 1/2 second, 1/4 second, 1/8, 15th, 60th, 125, 250, 500 and 1000. Another thing you must always remember on these cameras is on this part of the dial here is the 1/30th setting, and on here is the 1 second setting. You must never try to turn this speed setting dial between 30 and 1, because you'll break the mechanism. So if you want to go from 1 to 30, you have to go clockwise right the way around the dial where you set it to 1/30th. And then B is right next to 1/30th. So again, we pull up, move, and just let it drop down into place. So here's B. We let go to release. And so we have there the full range of, or pretty much all the speeds you could need. One other thing you should remember on this camera is that you shouldn't put it away with the shutter cocked. You should always make sure the shutter is fired before you put it away. And you also, in the instruction manual, they tell you not to leave the speed setting on the slower speeds while the camera is stored for any length of time. So I'm not entirely sure how you get around that. If you've taken a shot with a slower speed and you don't want to use your camera for a while, that could present a problem. I've never found it cause any real problem to the mechanism myself. I've been using these Russian cameras for many years now, about 35 years, and I've never actually known that cause a problem. What else can we say about the Zorki? Well, it has, I'll pop the lens back on, it has a self-timer mechanism, which is here. Now this little lever here, this is the self-timer mechanism. So what we do is we wind on the film. Let's put it on a fast speed. Move the self-timer mechanism around, this time in an anti-clockwise direction, not like the Feds which go in a clockwise direction. This one goes in an anti-clockwise direction. So we're all set now to take a selfie. This is how old school selfies were done. And then this is this little button here, this is the release for the self-timer, so we'll press that. Oh. And it gets to about 10 o'clock, it should fire. And there it just fired, you just heard the clack of the shutter. The shutter is said to be quite loud on these, although I don't really find it louder. I think it's quite a quiet shutter. It's certainly not as quiet as the Leica shutter. It's not as quiet as the Fed shutter, but only very slightly louder than the Fed shutter, so it's not a noisy shutter at all. So this is a good camera for street photography. Turning it round to see the back view, we have the combined viewfinder and rangefinder window here. So that's a really big advance over the earlier Zorkis, is the fact that the rangefinder and viewfinder windows are combined. And through this camera, through the viewfinder on the Zorki 4, you will notice, if you look through the viewfinder on the Zorki 4, you will notice that it's very big and bright. Unlike the Fed 4 and 5 viewfinders, which are quite squinty and small and dim, this one is very big and bright, with a strong rangefinder patch right in the centre. The Russians clearly knew how to make rangefinders. This camera is getting on for 40 years old. In fact, it's 42 years old, and the rangefinder is still very clean, very clear, and very easily visible when you look through the viewfinder. So it's a very nice piece of kit. As cheap rangefinders go, this camera, in my opinion, simply cannot be bettered. This is a wonderful machine. They're available cheaply, but prices are starting to creep upwards. Although you can still find bargains, one that's really in good, guaranteed, good order is, prices are creeping up towards the £60–70 mark here in the UK. This one was one of those rare bargains. I think I paid about £18 for this one from eBay, but the reason was it was described as, it's one of those eBay sales that was described as, I really don't know whether it's working or not, which means 9 times out of 10 actually it doesn't work. And it's true that when I got this camera it didn't work, but the fault was very, very small. The fault was that this shutter speed dial selector was loose. It simply needed 2 screws tightening, one in the back here, one in the front here, very small screws, which I tightened up with a jeweler's screwdriver. And then I had a perfect working camera with a very, very nice lens. There is no light meter on this camera, unlike the Fed 4. The Fed 4 built-in light meter really is very, very handy. But it really depends, what kind of camera you want. The Zorki is a much nicer looking camera, and I just feel more comfortable carrying it because the Fed is a bit of a brick. It's a bit larger. It's not quite as nice looking, but it does have that built-in light meter. The Fed has that built-in light meter, which makes it that bit more practical. But then what's practicality as against style? And the Zorki 4K has style by the bucket load. It also has, as well as style by the bucket load, a diopter adjuster here, which is a little lever. Let me turn it over and show you. So this lever here, see I'm moving that, that is a diopter adjustment in case you wear glasses, so you can correct the focus of the eyepiece to your particular eyesight. So that is a very useful thing. However, and there is a however, as far as I'm concerned anyway, there is a however, I am, like all of us, not quite as young as I was. In fact, I'm quite a bit older than I used to be. And when I used to really want one of these cameras, I used to look at these in the shop windows of, high street photographers, Dixon's and so on. When I was just starting photography, and I really, really wanted one of these. And I had good, very sharp eyesight in those days, enough to read the very tiny printing that is on this speed dial. And it really is tiny. It's so tiny that I can't actually see that without my glasses anymore. That's a consideration if your eyesight isn't quite what it used to be. They're so small, the numbers are so small, I just can't see them without the aid of glasses. And of course, if you're wearing glasses, that means that you've got to put them up against the viewfinder here when you look through it, so you've got a little distance between your eye and the viewfinder, and that means that you can't quite see as clearly as you would without glasses through the viewfinder. But that poses a problem. What do you do? Do you put your glasses on to change the speed and then take them off to look through the viewfinder? But as problems go, that's a pretty minor one. So there we are. This is the wonderful Zorki 4K. In my view, it really is the best all-round combination for a Soviet rangefinder. They are still relatively cheap, so my advice is, if you want one, grab one while they're relatively cheap, because they will not stay that cheap forever. The world's now waking up to the virtues of film once again. Film, of course, will never become as popular as digital, but film is now far more popular than it was 5 years ago. And because of that, the prices of these old cameras are starting to rise. In my opinion, the Zorki will become quite collectible, so if you want one, grab one now. Okay, so that's the wondrous Zorki 4K, my favourite, probably on balance, of all the Russian rangefinders. See you next time for more Zenography, whatever that should turn out to be.